Hey guys, hi. So this is Arjun Deshmukh, and I'm an investment banker. But besides that, I'm also a history and heritage enthusiast. And we have with us.
And my name is Saniya. I am an Indologist and a trainer.
Since I'm a history enthusiast, I thought there are many learnings from history. So why can't we actually draw parallels from history and relate them to what we are seeing today, right? So the world is in a COVID-19 pandemic, and it's really I see a lot of things that happened in the past which can relate to what we are seeing right now. So this show is an attempt to actually draw learnings from our past and from our Indian history and see how well they relate to what we see in the world around us today. So, Saniya, I am an economics student, right? And I read about how governments raise money, and since the times that we are going right now, there's a dire need of funds for all governments. So, I was just curious, what were the sources of revenue for governments or for kings in historical times?
Right. So, since we're speaking about revenue and revenue generation, the first ever documented text that we have about income generation, about revenue generation, about taxation from ancient Indian history was the Kautilya Arthashastra, which spoke about the revenue administration, politics, law, and legal institutions back from the Magadhan Empire. So this is a text which dates back to about 2300 years ago.
Oh, nice.
Right. So in that, Kautilya writes, he gives about 4 ways in which states used to raise revenue. Mm-hmm. Right. So the first was, of course, income from the state-owned properties. Mm-hmm. Then there were state-controlled manufacturing units, leisure activities from which the state generated revenue. Then, mm-hmm. of course, there were different types of taxes, indirect as well as direct taxes, which were paid in cash as well as kind. So that was another source of income. And fourth was, of course, trading. So these were the 4 ways in which the state used to raise revenue, say about 2,300 years back in time from today.
Wow, that is really interesting because I can draw so many parallels right now in my head saying, okay, what we have state-owned enterprises today also, and we have similar indirect and direct taxation systems today. So yeah, that's really interesting. So now we'll go into each of these topics, but tell me something more about taxation. So how exactly was taxation? Were there different types of taxes or were there different sources of tax income? Because taxation, it's a very dry subject. CAs get a very bad expression on their face when they talk about taxation, but was it interesting and was it very well structured in the ancient times?
Yes, it was absolutely well structured. So Kautilya defines that he mentions that there were about 12 different types of taxes that were collected from the people back then, from the state. So some of them there were of course the customs, which included the import, export, the octroi, and those kind of taxes. Mm-hmm. Then there were transactional taxes, which included the sales taxes, the purchase taxes, which the buyer or the seller respectively had to pay. Right. Then he also mentions about the road cess, so the tolls that we pay today. Right. So those were relevant and were collected even back in those times.
And then, they had good roads also.
Probably. Let's hope so. Yeah. Then they also collected certain surcharges. They collected money for royalty. Mm-hmm. They collected some maintenance amount for the army. So likewise, there were 7 or 8 more types of. So in all, there were about 12 types of taxes that were collected from the government, from the people that the state collected.
Wow, that is really detailed. I mean, for someone to have those kind of insights around 2,300 years ago, which we think this is something that we do new and we have been doing it only for the past 100 years, but I think we really have a very thoroughly put legacy, and people were very thorough in their thought process, and they were able to articulate things very well. So yeah,
they were very specific. They knew what is to be done, what are the different channels through which we can generate revenue for the state to run. So yeah, they had some amazing clarity, I think, back then.
Right, that's very interesting. So another thing that I'm curious about is now there are all the other taxes, but I am a common man, right? So for me, my personal income tax is kind of the way I see my taxes, and in that there are numerous brackets, and I always cry, why am I in this bracket? And I'm really excited when there's a budget announcement and they say that brackets have been changed and things like that. So were there kind of similar buckets that were enforced in an ancient period, or was it something different?
It was slightly different. So the kind of money that was supposed to, so the kind of tax that was supposed to be paid was differentiated according to the occupation or the goods or the commodities that were levied the taxes upon. Right. So, for example, if there was the farmers were supposed to pay about 1/6 of their produce to the state in the form of tax.
And so that was not a coin. That was not in terms of coins or cash. It was actually.
It was the produce
right.
that the farmers actually had to pay.
Right.
Now this was 1/6 in a normal scenario. But then whenever there was a war or there was kind of a stringent situation
we have
right now, right. So at times they even kind of raised their taxes from 1/6 to maybe 1/4 or even at times 1/3 of their produce they had to give as taxes to the government, to the state. Apart from that, in pressing times, the chancellor also had the authority to force the farmers to take a second crop.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it was not just one, but they made people cultivate a second crop, a summer crop that they called it.
Right.
However, there were a few commodities which were exempt from taxes. So right now, like we have probably the gifts. A gift amount is exempt from taxes, right? Within family or. So back then, if there were festivities or a marriage situation in the house, so whatever commodities were needed for that festivity or that celebration were exempt from taxes.
Oh, however, that's really insightful. They really thought through when a person needs money, when he doesn't need money.
Right.
That's good.
And one thing which is again pretty common in today's time, which was actually happening back then, is that liquor had a constant tax of 5%.
Oh wow, that's I wish we were living in those times, but
so it was just 5%. Yeah. Nice. So that's pretty much. So again, if you were selling oils, there was a different tax amount that you were supposed to pay on it. Now the people who were into animal rearing, into animal husbandry, so they had to pay a certain chunk of their revenue or their, if they were rearing certain animals, then they had to pay that to the royal palace as a produce. So every commodity, every produce had their own taxation or the revenue generation slab or system, so to say.
Wow, that's really, really interesting. But so, now, when I am paying my taxes, which by the way, I do pay in full always.
Both of us.
Yeah. So, were there instances where people didn't pay taxes, or they did some kind of a fuzzy mess, a jhol or jugaad to get away with taxes? And were they able to get away with those? And if they was by some means caught, then what were the punishments for those?
Right. So it very rarely happened that they could get away or probably fool the state, fool the government by not paying taxes. So yeah, the state made sure that everybody paid their taxes. However, it was not always, like I said, in labor, in person, in cash or in kind. There were times when people offered their service. So as a labor service to the state, that we cannot pay you in cash or as a produce, but I mean we'll work for you for free.
Nice.
So that was the kind of adjustment that they made with the government. However, the state ensured that the enforcement of collection of taxes was absolutely strict and stringent, and the kind of fines that they had to undergo was a direct physical amputation.
Oh, if you don't pay your taxes, maybe they'll cut your hand.
They cut your chop off your limbs. Yeah. So that was the extent of fines or punishments that people had to face if they did not pay their taxes.
Wow.
I mean, if they tried to fool the state. However, they made sure that corruption was always kept a check on. So there were not a lot of instances that we have documented to refer to that people have flouted taxation and
I mean, obviously, if the punishment is something like, my leg or hand will be cut off, I'd be careful as to how much money I'm saving.
Yeah, right.
Right. Yeah, so that's really interesting. I mean, the whole taxation system, I think of it as a system that was very well thought through and very well structured and knew a number of aspects that someone, if I have to write a tax system, something that I might neglect, were really well taken care of. And the system looks very holistic. Now, since the world is going through a pandemic, and I see our state and central governments declaring a lot of relief packages or reducing certain direct taxes and so on. So, where now, obviously, the treasury of the nation is going to be depleted after all this is over, and they would need a lot of funds to actually refill that. So, were there similar situations in the past where kings, after let's say a war or a pandemic or an epidemic, faced situations similar to these, and how did they handle those?
Yes, of course. I mean, if there was a war, there were certain flus, pandemics of flus that hit the people back then. So, yes, they did have to face a similar situation, but then they knew, they were prepared for it, how to face such situations.
I guess prepared is underlined, bold, highlighted, everything.
Right. So, they had certain methods which they used to kind of follow. So in such times, they used to kind of levy special taxes on a certain group of people from the population. So they knew who were those people who are doing really good and who can afford to pay additional taxes. Wow. So they had a way in which they could identify those people, and then they would levy special taxes on them. Then, like I mentioned earlier, they used to ask the farmers to cultivate an extra crop or a summer crop so as to increase production. They made use of certain secret agents. So this is a very interesting thing that they used to follow. Right. So they kind of used to pick up people who were able to kind of put in good amount of donation, and these people behaved like secret agents within the people. I mean, within the other population, and because these people were well known, they were either entertainers or they were people of a good stature. So they started fundraising by themselves. So they used to announce that, okay, this is a problem that we are facing, and to cater to that problem, I am going to start my own personal fund. So, and this is the amount. So they used to kind of put a hefty amount against their own name, and they used to say that, okay, I'm going to raise certain amount of money, and because that person was a popular face or somebody who people kind of connected with. Even people started putting in whatever little donation, voluntary donation they could in that particular fund.
I think we have a very direct example of this right now. So we, after the pandemic started, we had this PM Cares Fund, and in that I think these not so disguised agents were all our film stars and sports persons who actually made big donations, and that's how the trend started. And now, when we have the second wave of COVID-19, we're actually able to use those funds to help people in need.
Right.
So, yeah, I think
so the root of this actually lies back
2,300 years back.
Yes. So that was one very interesting thing that they kind of started. And then, of course, there were instances when they had to take possession of temple properties, whatever donations that were given to temples or religious institutions. That revenue was used in such times of emergencies.
Interesting. So I think even today we see a lot of our temple trusts have like massive amounts of wealth, and in such times, I mean it's just maybe a suggestion for the government and other viewers who are watching to persuade the government is that this money should be used. If it's donated for a noble cause, why not bring it to use for a noble cause? Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, and then they also had some funny ways of extracting money from the gullible people. So these were
That's really shrewd.
yeah. But yeah, these were pretty much 5-6 ways in which they kind of raised money in times of adversities.
Wow, that's really interesting.
So I think we're there on one front. We can actually make use of a few more in the current situation. Yeah.
Right. And so, another thing that I usually face is that when I pay my taxes and when I look at the situation around me, I really don't think that my taxes have been put to good use. Right? I mean, if I have to drive from here in, let's say, 2 kilometer radius, my car is going to go through at least 20-25 potholes. And we have the air quality in Indian cities being the worst, and numerous other problems which need structural solutions put together by the government through the money that we pay through taxes. But I don't see that happening. So was that something what was seen in ancient times also, and how did people deal with such situations? Or what was the norm of the time then?
Okay, so whenever a king took over, his first and foremost duty was to look after the welfare of his people.
Okay.
It was his dharma. Now, dharma here is not a religion, it is his responsibility. Look at it in a way of a responsibility or his duty towards his subjects. So, the relationship that the king had with his people was more of a dharma, right?
Okay.
So it was a very different relationship that they shared back then, and it was the moral, or I would say the sacred duty of the king to look after his people, to provide, to protect them from anything that befalls upon them. Okay? So
Right.
he was the person who was solely responsible for the protection of the state. So now it so happened that yes, of course, just like some of us feel today that our taxes are not probably put to the right use. There were people back then who even thought that if in times when a king is incapable of protecting his people, protecting his kingdom, the people had the right to ask for a refund of their taxes from the king.
Wow,
And
is.
yes,
I guess my tax rebate for the last year isn't coming yet. But I guess, yeah, I really like this one because it really reflects on how transparent the whole system was.
Exactly. So they had a right to ask for a refund of the taxes that they've been paying for so many years, as well as they had the right to stop paying taxes.
Wow, that is
So
really
that
stark.
that is more of a no confidence motion that was probably passed against the king. When the people actually came together, and the king is not performing his duties very well.
Right.
So yeah, so they had this kind of I would say authority, or they were able to do this. And this, by the way, is not only mentioned in the Arthashastra. But the last statement that I made is you can find that statement on Government of India's Income Tax Department website.
Wow. So the government of India is basically telling you that this
If
is what
you're
our
not
philosophy
happy,
is. Yeah.
If you're not happy, then well.
I
just
wouldn't.
saying.
Yeah,
Just saying.
you wouldn't comment on
Yeah.
that, but yeah.
So this is pretty much how the system, the taxation or the revenue system was back then. It was extremely transparent, crystal clear. People knew that if the state is providing well for them, they are supposed to pay taxes or face the noise. And if the king is not performing, is not fulfilling his roles, responsibilities, and duties, then they had a right to voice their opinion against the whole system.
Wow, I think this conversation that we've had for the past 20 minutes that has been really insightful in terms of how similar things that we do right now in terms of taxation and how it's collected is with what we had 2,300 years ago. And it's so starting that not really a lot of things have changed in such a long time span.
Okay.
So yeah, that's really interesting. I think we should have more of these conversations.
Yes.
I think our viewers can get a lot of insights from our conversations.
Hopefully they can draw parallels.
Yeah.
In the right context, of course.
Yes.
Not in the irrelevant things which a lot of people do. Shastro mein likha hai, isliye abhi ye karo.
Yeah.
And the relevance is very important. So
And-
we'll try to get relevant content which can be useful to you in the 21st century.
Nice. I think it was a fun conversation, and is our coffee finished? I think
Yes.
we have one last sip.
So yeah, we hope you enjoyed this conversation. If there is any other topic you think we should touch upon, wherein we can speak about that from our history and probably draw parallels in the 21st century, please let us know in the comment section, and we'll be happy to include and talk about, have a conversation about that topic as well. So yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. Please.
And if you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And like us everywhere. We are on a lot of social media platforms. Pathil, just like it.
Everything.
We like a lot of love.
Yes. Show some love.
Yeah. Thank you for watching.
Thank you so much.